Let's bring in NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. Perry Stein is a Washington Post reporter covering the Justice Department. Here in studio, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. So, Perry, for people who don't closely follow the hierarchy of the judicial system or the kinds of cases that would find their way now before Emil Bovey, Judge Emil Bovey, help us understand the concern that every Democrat and 2 Republicans had and what this might mean going forward.
Yeah, so there were many allegations against Bovey. He has been at the center of some of Donald Trump's the Justice Department during the Trump administration's biggest controversies. And there's been accusations that he has kind of bucked the norms, the precedent, the legal principles of the Justice Department of courts in favor of, executing the president's political agenda. Those are the accusations. And obviously, when you're a judge, you're supposed to be impartial to politics. We obviously see judges from every political party and ilk, but people concerned, these Democrats were concerned that he would not be able to be nonpartisan on the bench.
So, Lisa, the Senate Judiciary Committee Chair, Chuck Grassley, is a co-founder of the Senate Whistleblower Protection Caucus. And just this morning, this is what he wrote, quote, "Today is National Whistleblower Day. Too often, whistleblowers are treated like skunks at a picnic. They are patriotic people trying to keep the government accountable to the people." You've been all over these complaints. Was there something believed to be missing or not credible?
Well, on some level, you'd have to ask Chuck Grassley and Senate Republicans that, because not all of these whistleblower complaints have been made available to the public. The first of the 3 whistleblowers, Erez Ruveni, made his complaint available publicly. He also supplemented that with more than 100 pages worth of documents that he said underlay his complaint. But the other 2 did not share their complaints publicly. In fact, the second whistleblower, and I spoke to sources familiar with this whistleblower, thought that he or she needed to keep those documents secret in order to avail themselves of the same whistleblower protections that Chuck Grassley says that he champions. So they notified the Judiciary Committee on June 13th that they had submitted a formal whistleblower complaint, and yet it doesn't appear that Chuck Grassley ever followed up with the Justice Department Inspector General to get those documents. In fact, Andrew Bakai, who represents that whistleblower, was on our colleague Ari Melber's show last night and said that the IG of the Justice Department even lost the complaint until yesterday.
Lost the complaint?
Lost the complaint when they were presented with a proof of receipt from the courier that had delivered those documents to the Justice Department Inspector General on May 5th, Chris, months ago.
Okay, so Ryan, you've been in contact with an organization representing Justice Department alums. What are they saying about Bovey's confirmation?
Yeah, so Stacey Young said here that Emil Bovey will be the enforcer of many of the attacks on DOJ and its employees by confirming his nomination to the Senate, courted the devastation he unleashed on the department. Multiple whistleblowers stepped forward to bear witness to his destruction of constitutional principles and institutional guardrails. Some senators unfairly criticized and discounted their claims, but history will honor their courage. The thousands of DOJ alum we represent stand ready to support anyone who is brave enough to expose the lawlessness coming from this department's leadership, Chris. But I think, as Lisa highlighted there's really a lot of concern about just protecting whistleblowers and the risk that they would take in coming forward with any information that they have, even getting vague, being very vague even about the specifics, because it doesn't seem as though, or at least those familiar with their thinking don't seem to think that their concerns are being taken very seriously through the Senate and by Senator Chuck Grassley's office.
And Lisa, in another example of norms that have many people concerned about how far off of what tradition and the Constitution say, right? The Trump administration is once looking to bypass Congress to keep interim prosecutors in place in California, in Nevada. They used a very similar process, right, to do it in New Jersey with Alina Habba. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, so Alina Habba, who has apparently been reinstated as the acting U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey, is now facing a legal challenge from a defendant in her district who says he can't go to trial on August 4th because she is not properly overseeing that office, that she hasn't been validly appointed. And just yesterday, Alina Habba's prosecutors submitted a response to that motion in court where they say she is validly serving as the acting U.S. attorney because she was properly appointed as the first assistant. The first assistant can serve as an acting under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. And this is key, the president properly removed as United States attorney the person that the district court purported to appoint. That's Desiree Grace, who was the first assistant. And these sort of shenanigans appear to be continuing in other areas of the country. But Chris, there's one thing in this brief that I think is really dangerous and I want to highlight for you, which is that she says in this brief that it's okay for the attorney general to even circumvent U.S. attorneys, that the U.S. attorney statutorily can delegate the functions ordinarily served by a U.S. attorney. I'm sorry, that the attorney general can delegate the functions ordinarily served by the U.S. attorney to any other officer, employee, or agency of the Department of Justice. So I just want you to imagine this for a second. Pam Bondi can take a bunch of people, call them special U.S. attorneys, appoint them to the Department of Justice without going through the conventional career prosecutor hiring process, and then sort of take away responsibilities from Senate-confirmed U.S. attorneys or people who should be Senate-confirmed and essentially have them serve the same purposes. This, to me, seems like a guidebook to what might be to come, that what we've seen already so far in terms of circumventing the law and the Senate may be child's play compared to what could come next.
Well, that leads me to my question to you, Perry, which is, given the serious questions raised, right, about Bove, frankly, Trump nominees in the judiciary and elsewhere, I mean, do Democrats see any recourse moving forward? Does anybody see any recourse moving forward?
Look, that's a great question. I mean, we have seen one nominee, Ed Martin, the D.C. U.S. attorney. His nomination did not go through. That's because Thom Tillis said he was not going to vote for people who condone the violence on January 6th. Democrats, when it came to Bove, tried to connect him, saying he fired these prosecutors that prosecuted the J6 cases, but Tillis did not see that connection and voted for them. So it's going to be hard for Democrats. I mean, I think that this vote for Bove, what it shows, Bove is what it shows is that Trump has made, a big philosophical change, which is that the Justice Department and the White House are closer, the post-Watergate independence that they used to have, or distance. He is no more. And the Republicans, I think, with this recent vote and a bunch of other votes, have said that, they have, largely approve of that, at least in these nominations. So I think it'll be hard.